It all started, as these things often do, with something perfectly ordinary. I'd just moved into a new apartment, Unit 3B, in an older, slightly rambling building on the edge of town. Rent was cheap, which was the main draw, and I was too busy, trying to make the peeling paint and dubious plumbing feel like character, to think too much about who might have lived there before me. My name is Alex, by the way. About a week in, I was tackling the back of the hall closet. You know, the kind of space that hasn't seen daylight since the Nixon administration. Stuffed behind a defunct water heater, I found a dusty cardboard box. Inside, nestled among old newspapers yellowed to the color of weak tea, were about a dozen cassette tapes. Each one was labeled simply with a date range, like June-July 2015 or March 2016. Cassettes. Who even used those in 2017, which was the latest date I saw? Curiosity, my old foe, got the better of me. I had an ancient Walkman knockoff somewhere, a relic from a childhood clear-out. That evening, with the city hum a distant comfort, I popped in the first tape, dated May 2015. Hiss, a click, then a man's voice. Normal sounding, a bit monotone. Let's call him Mark. It feels right. Testing. May 3rd. Another day. For a while, it was just mundane. Mark talked about his job. Sounded like data entry. The weather. What he'd had for dinner. A bit like a lonely audio diary. I almost turned it off. Then, about halfway through the second tape, it shifted. Saw her again today, Mark said, his voice unchanged, still flat. She was watering the plants on her balcony. The red geraniums. My ears perked up. My little balcony had hooks for planters. She wears her hair up when it's warm. Smart. Keeps it off her neck. A little weird, sure. But maybe he was just an observant, slightly awkward guy. I told myself that, even as a small, cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. I kept listening over the next few days, working my way through the box. Mark never named the woman. He just called her her. The details became more specific. She gets home around 6:15 p.m. most nights. Except Tuesdays. Tuesdays, she's later. Book club, maybe? Heard her laughing through the wall last night. A nice sound. Wonder what was so funny. My blood ran a little colder. Through the wall? This wasn't just casual observation from across the street. This was close. By the fifth tape, January-February 2016, the unease was a constant companion. When I listened, his tone never changed, that was the thing. No anger, no overt excitement. Just this steady, unnerving cataloging. The floorboards outside her door creak if you put your weight on the third one from the left. I've learned to avoid it. I froze. My hand went to my mouth. I lived in 3B, the third floorboard outside my door. I'd noticed it myself. It did creak. I got up, heart hammering, and very carefully stepped on it. Creak. My breath hitched. This wasn't about a neighbor. This was about this apartment. My apartment. The previous tenant. I should have stopped. Thrown them out. Called someone, though. What would I say? I found some creepy tapes? But I couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Horrifying, but I had to see the end. The recordings from late 2016 became more focused, more possessive. She bought a new lamp today. It's yellow. Doesn't really go with the rest of her things. How could he know that? Unless my gaze swept around my living room, my new home, suddenly feeling like an exposed nerve. I pictured him, Mark, somehow seeing into this space. Had he been a neighbor? Someone in the building? The landlord hadn't mentioned any problems. The sense of being watched became almost palpable. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, every footstep in the hallway outside made me jump. I started double-checking the locks obsessively. Sleep became a shallow, restless thing. I'd wake up, convinced I'd heard that third, floorboard sigh. The last tape was labeled January-March 2017. By now, I was almost sick with dread, but I had to know how it ended. Mark's voice was the same, infuriatingly calm. She has a little wooden bird, he said. On the top shelf in the living room, almost hidden. I saw it when the light hit it just right, through the window, just for a second. A robin, I think. I'd like to hold it. A chill, colder than any I'd felt before, snaked up my spine. A wooden bird, he continued. She's been looking tired lately. Maybe she's not sleeping well. I worry. Then, after a pause that stretched for an eternity, I think I need to make sure she's okay. Up close, the lock on 3B isn't very good. I've been practicing. The tape hissed for a few seconds. Then a faint metallic scratching sound. My own door lock. My breath caught in my throat. The scratching stopped. A click. Then Mark's voice, closer, as if he was whispering right into the microphone, or maybe right into the room. It's open. The tape clicked off. Dead silence. My heart felt like it was trying to batter its way out of my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around my living room, now lit by the sickly orange glow of the streetlights outside. The top shelf. There was a bookshelf in the corner that came with the apartment, a dusty old thing I hadn't paid much attention to. Slowly, as if wading through water, I got up. My legs were trembling. I dragged a chair over, climbed onto it, my fingers shaking as I reached for the top shelf, a place I hadn't even thought to clean yet. My fingers brushed against something small, smooth. Wood. I pulled it down. It was a little wooden bird. A robin, covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been sitting there, undisturbed, for a very long time. Since 2017, perhaps. I don't remember much about the next hour. I think I screamed. I know I grabbed the box of tapes, the bird, and ran out. Of the apartment, out of the building, not stopping until I was in the brightly lit lobby of the nearest 24-hour pharmacy, gasping for air. The police were sympathetic in a tired sort of way. They took the tapes, the bird, made a report. Said the previous tenant of 3B had moved out abruptly in April 2017, left no forwarding address. No one had heard from her since. There was no record of a Mark living in the building, or any complaints about a stalker at that time. Maybe he was a guest of another tenant. Maybe he worked in the building. They didn't know. The case, if you could even call it that, was cold before it even began. I broke my lease, paid the penalty. I couldn't stay there another night. I moved in with my sister Sarah for a while. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I can hear the faint hiss of a cassette tape, or the creak of a floorboard just outside my door. The recordings were evidence, certainly. Evidence that some people walk among us with intentions so quiet, so patient, they're almost invisible, until you're the one in their sights. Evidence that sometimes the monsters are just ordinary men. And what happened to the woman who loved red geraniums and little wooden robins? That's the question that keeps me up. The silence on the tape a far more terrifying answer than any sound could ever be. Story 2. Even now, more than 30 years later, I can still feel the damp chill of that fog, still see the way it swallowed the world whole. December 3rd, 1988. Mount Pleasant wasn't a big town, more of a sprawling suburb that hadn't quite decided if it wanted to be countryside or city. I was 11, and my best friend Kevin lived just down the street. That particular Saturday, we'd been out in the woods behind my house, the ones that bordered Miller's farm, engaged in some earnest, forgotten mission, involving sticks as swords and a half-hearted attempt to build a fort. My name's Michael, by the way. The sun had begun its early winter dip, painting the bare branches in hues of orange and purple, when the fog started to roll in. It wasn't unusual for Mount Pleasant, nestled in a bit of a valley. But this fog was different. It came quickly, silently, like a white tide, and it was thick. One minute we could see the lights of Kevin's house winking through the trees. The next, even the closest oaks were just ghostly suggestions. "Whoa," Kevin breathed, his voice already sounding a little muffled. "This is epic," I agreed, but a small worm of unease had started to wriggle in my gut. It was getting properly dark, and the fog was making everything feel wrong. Sounds were deadened. The familiar rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant bark of a dog, all of it was smothered under this heavy, wet blanket. We should probably head back, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. My mom, Susan, would have a fit if I was late for dinner, especially in this. Yeah, okay, Kevin agreed, a little too quickly. We started to pick our way back, following the faint trail we'd beaten down over countless adventures. The fog swirled around us, cold on our faces. It was like walking through milk. Every now and then, a tree would loom out of the white, startling us. The silence was the worst part. It pressed in, heavy and expectant. That's when I first felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck, the one that tells you you're being watched. I glanced at Kevin. His face, pale in the dim, swirling light, was turned slightly, his head cocked as if listening. You hear that? He whispered. I shook my head. Hear what? Nothing. That's the thing. It's too quiet. We walked a little faster. The path was supposed to curve around a large, gnarled oak we called Old Man Willow, but it wasn't a willow at all. As we approached where it should have been, two figures resolved out of the fog. They were just standing there, about 20 feet away, directly on the path, not moving. My first thought was relief. Other people. Maybe Mr. Henderson, who sometimes walked his dog this way, but it was late for him. But as we got a little closer, the relief curdled. They weren't Mr. Henderson. There were two of them, both tall and unnaturally still. They were dressed in dark clothing, coats that seemed too heavy, too formal for a walk in the woods. I couldn't make out their faces clearly. The fog and the deepening twilight conspired to keep them in shadow, like their features were deliberately blurred. One of them might have been wearing a hat low over their brow. Hello? Kevin called out, his voice cracking a little. No response. They just stood there. Watching us? It felt like it. The air around them seemed colder. The fog, thicker. My heart started to thud against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Why didn't they say anything? Why were they just standing there? Maybe they're lost, I whispered to Kevin. But the explanation felt hollow, even to me. They don't look lost, Kevin whispered back, his eyes wide. They look... He didn't finish. We slowed our pace, an unspoken agreement passing between us. Going around them meant wading into the dense, thorny undergrowth on either side of the path. Going forward meant walking right past them. One of the figures, the one on the left, very slowly lifted a hand. It wasn't a wave. It was more of a beckoning gesture, a slow, deliberate curl of the fingers. It was the most singularly terrifying thing I had ever seen. That was it. The fragile thread of childhood bravado snapped. Run, I choked out. We didn't need telling twice. We turned and bolted back the way we'd come, crashing through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that whipped at our faces and tore at our clothes. The fog seemed to cling to us, trying to slow us down. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel their presence, their stillness, burning into my spine. Did they follow? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. Every snap of a twig behind us sounded like a footstep. We ran blindly, fueled by pure, unadulterated panic, until we burst out of the woods and onto the relative safety of the asphalt road, gasping for breath, our lungs burning. Kevin's house was just 100 yards away, its porch light a welcoming beacon in the swirling gray. We stumbled inside, babbling our story to Kevin's mom, Linda. She listened, her brow furrowed, then gave us hot chocolate and told us it was probably just some teenagers trying to be spooky, or that the fog was playing tricks on our eyes. You boys certainly have active minds, she said, with a kind smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My own mom, when I finally got home, said much the same, but she was more focused on how late I was and the state of my clothes. Dismissal. That's what we got, and maybe they were right. Maybe it was just the fog, our young minds conjuring phantoms out of the gloom. But I don't think so. Kevin and I talked about it later, in hushed whispers. We never agreed on the details. He thought one of them was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin he only glimpsed for a second. I remembered the hand, that slow, inviting curl of the fingers. We both agreed on the silence, the utter stillness, and the profound sense of wrongness. We never went back to that part of the woods after dark again, fog or no fog. Over the years, the memory has faded at the edges, like an old photograph. But the core of it remains sharp. The suffocating fog, the unnatural silence, and those two figures who seemed to materialize from the mist itself. Who were they? What did they want? Were they even real, or just a shared hallucination brought on by fear and atmosphere? The not knowing is, perhaps, the worst part. Sometimes, on a particularly foggy night, I'll find myself looking out the window, half expecting to see two dark shapes standing silently at the edge of the light, their faces lost in shadow, one hand slowly beginning to beckon. The That pleasant incident, as I started calling it in my head years later, left me with a lingering chill, a quiet realization that sometimes the most unsettling things are those that remain just outside the reach of explanation, hidden in the fog. Story 3. It's funny the things you stumble across when you're not looking for them. My name is Frank, and for a good few years, I volunteered down at the County Historical Society, mostly archiving old documents. That's where I found it, tucked away in a box of miscellaneous police reports from the 50s, many of them water-stained and smelling faintly of mildew and thyme. This one yet was relatively pristine, typed neatly on thin, onion-skin paper. The header read, Incident. Report, welfare check. Property, Willow Creek Road, unincorporated. Reporting officer, Patrolman Arthur Jenkins. Date, October 28, 1955. Most of these old reports were mundane. Stray cows, minor disputes, the occasional drunk and disorderly. But something about the way Jenkins, the reporting officer, phrased his initial observations caught my eye. Willow Creek Road. Even now, it's a pretty remote stretch, winding along the creek through dense woods. Back in '55, it would have been truly isolated. The report began simply enough. A call had come in from a Mrs. Henderson, who lived about 2 miles down from the property in question. The old Holloway place, as it was known then. She hadn't seen any sign of life from the house in over a week. No smoke from the chimney, no lights, which was unusual for the time of year. The Holloways were an elderly couple, Elias and Martha, who mostly kept to themselves. Patrolman Jenkins, according to his report, drove out there around 4 p.m. He noted the weather. Overcast, damp, with a chill in the air portending an early frost. He found the narrow, unpaved track leading to the house easily enough, but it was overgrown. The house itself, he'd typed, appeared sound, but unkempt. Shutters on several windows were closed. No smoke from chimney, no vehicle visible. He knocked on the front door. No answer. He knocked again, louder, announcing himself as police. After a minute or so, he heard a faint shuffling from within. The door opened a crack, held by a chain. An eye peered out. "Mrs. Holloway?" Jenkins asked. A voice, thin and dry like rustling leaves, replied, "We're quite well, officer. Thank you for your concern." Jenkins explained Mrs. Henderson's call. The voice behind the door simply repeated, "We're fine, just resting." Now, Jenkins was a young officer then, but not a fool. He insisted, politely but firmly, that he needed to visually confirm their well-being. There was a long pause. Then, the chain rattled, and the door opened. Standing there was a woman he presumed to be Martha Holloway. Jenkins described her as gaunt, pale, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned dress, indifferent to the mildness of the day indoors. Her eyes were wide and held an expression I could not readily decipher. Not fear precisely, more a profound stillness. She invited him in. The house, Jenkins noted, was dark. The heavy drapes were drawn in the front parlor, and the only light came from the hallway behind her. There was a smell he couldn't quite place. Not unpleasant, but sterile. Like a room that had been aired out too thoroughly for too long, with something underneath that couldn't quite be scrubbed away. He asked to see Mr. Holloway. Martha led him into the parlor. Elias Holloway was seated in a wing-back chair, facing away from the door, towards a cold, empty fireplace. He didn't turn when they entered. "Elias, dear," Martha said, her voice still that dry whisper. "The officer is here to see us." Elias Holloway slowly, very slowly, turned his head. Jenkins described him as looking almost identical to his wife in pallor and stillness. He wore a similar dark suit. His eyes, too, were wide and fixed. Good afternoon, officer, Elias said. His voice was a near echo of Martha's. This is where Jenkins's report started to get strange. He asked them standard questions. Were they well? Did they need anything? Their answers were brief, almost monosyllabic. Yes, they were well. No, they needed nothing. There was no inflection in their voices, Jenkins typed. It was as if they were reciting lines learned by rote, and their eyes, they never seemed to blink. They watched me constantly, but it felt like they were looking through me, or at something just over my shoulder. He noted an odd detail, a half-eaten meal on the small table beside Elias's chair. A piece of bread, a slice of what looked like cold meat, a glass of milk. It looked, Jenkins wrote, as if it had been placed there some days ago and remained untouched. There was no sign of decay, nor any insects, which struck me as peculiar for the time of year. He asked if they'd eaten. We will, Martha replied without looking at the food. The unease in Jenkins's typed words was almost palpable as I read them. He felt compelled to ask more questions, but he wasn't sure what he was looking for. He asked about their family, their plans. They had no family nearby, they said. Their plans were to remain. The atmosphere in the room he described as oppressively silent. Even my own footsteps on the worn rug seemed unnaturally loud. There were no clocks ticking, no sounds from outside, yet I knew the creek was not far off and should have been audible. Then came the part that made the hairs on my own arms stand up decades later, in that dusty archive room. Jenkins wrote, I asked Mrs. Holloway if she wouldn't mind opening the drapes to let some light in. She looked at her husband. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The light troubles our eyes, officer, she said. Her own gaze was fixed on me, unblinking. We prefer the dim. He decided he'd seen enough. They were alive, yes. Peculiar. He had no grounds to interfere further. As he was preparing to leave, Elias Holloway spoke, his voice still flat, still devoid of emotion. You'll tell Mrs. Henderson we appreciate her diligence. The way Jenkins typed it, the emphasis on diligence, felt chilling. He stepped outside into the fading afternoon light and noted his relief. The air outside was cool, but it felt clean and fresh after the stagnancy of the house. He looked back. The door was closed. He thought he saw a flicker of movement behind the parlor drapes, but couldn't be sure. The final paragraph of Jenkins's report was brief. Recommend follow-up visit in 1 week if no further contact from residents is observed by neighbors. The Holloways presented as eccentric, but no immediate cause for intervention was apparent. Yet the overall atmosphere of the residence and the demeanor of the occupants was disquieting. Underneath, in handwritten pen, was a note dated November 5, 1955, signed by a Sergeant Miller. Follow-up conducted by Officer Jenkins and myself. House found vacant. No sign of forced entry. All personal belongings appear to be gone. Neighbors report no sighting of Holloways or any vehicle departing. Inquiries with postal service and distant relatives, located via tax records, prove fruitless. Case closed pending further information. That was it. I sat there for a long time, the thin paper cool under my fingers. The Holloways just vanished. The couple Jenkins described didn't sound like normal elderly people, even eccentrics. The stillness, the unblinking eyes, the strange food, the aversion to light. The sterile yet somehow wrong smell of the house. How did they leave without a car, without anyone seeing them, taking all their belongings? Where did they go? I tried to find out more. The old Holloway place, as it turns out, burned down in the late 60s. A lightning strike, supposedly. No one ever rebuilt on that land. Local old-timers I asked had vague memories of the Holloways being reclusive, but no one remembered anything specific about their disappearance, or the visit from Patrolman Jenkins. It was just another forgotten story, but it stuck with me. Jenkins's careful, increasingly unnerved prose painted such a vivid picture. Those two figures, pale and still in the dim, shuttered house, their flat voices and unblinking stares. They weren't overtly threatening, not in the way you'd normally think, but there was a deep, cold wrongness to them, a sense of something utterly alien masquerading in human form. Sometimes I wonder what Jenkins really saw, or what he felt that he couldn't quite bring himself to type. And I wonder what would have happened if he'd insisted Martha Holloway open those drapes. What exactly preferred the dim in the house on Willow Creek? The file gave no answers, only a quiet, lingering dread that settled deep in my bones.